So again, loving yourself is a huge thing. 80 to 90% of people don't really love themselves. And therefore, if you look at all of the suffering in the world and the tyrants and the dictators, they all come from people who have a wounded inner child, who don't have this deep wound, right? And as I say, men are at war with each other because men are at war with themselves. So you have to find a way to love yourself. That's part of your healing,
And
right?
what
You want to
that
heal.
might sound very abstract to many. What does that feel like, look like, sound like?
Yeah. Well, in my case, at some point I came to realize, okay, what defines me? I was very trusting as a child. My innate nature is to trust. I was very idealistic, right? I always want things to be a certain way. I was very peace loving, harmony seeking. I was very kind of intellectual, in my head a lot. And then my father came into my life when I was 7. I didn't know him until then. He was off to Canada getting his PhD and so. And when he saw me as a kid, he said, "Oh my God." So he said, "Oh, you're too idealistic. You need to be pragmatic. You're too trusting. You shouldn't trust anybody. You're too peace loving. You need to be rough and tough, right? And you're too in your head. You need to be street smart." So he basically convinced me that everything that was true for me was actually a weakness. That all my qualities were not strengths but weaknesses, right? So for the next few decades, I tried to be the opposite of who I was, because the father's voice matters a lot, right? As they say, be careful what you say to your children, because your outer voice to them becomes their inner voice for the rest of their life. Okay. And so I became overly cynical. I became, lost my idealism. But that was still not me. That's not a formula for happiness or impact. So ultimately, I had to come to that, the gifts I came here with, right? And I have to live into those. And I know it took some coaching and some other insights that enabled me to come to that realization that these are strengths, not weaknesses, right? But you have to embrace them, and you have to acknowledge and see the strengths that they are, the beauty of your innate qualities, right? And so that's a tough one. It took me decades to get from knowing yourself to loving yourself, but it can be accelerated if you have this kind of awareness. And then you have to be yourself, right? What the world needs us, all of us, is to live into who we are uniquely. So rest comfortably in your present. Don't be acting. Don't try to be pretending to be somebody that you're not. Then you have to choose your life is the fourth step. I was living my life as kind of a victim of my own life. I was saying, why was I born to this kind of father, into that culture? Why did I have this and this experience? I have a special needs child. I saw myself as a victim in that way, and so forth. And the realization I had at a silent retreat is that, life is not a buffet. I was being served a meal there, and they didn't ask you what you want. It's a silent retreat. They just give you whatever they have, right? And I said, that's kind of a metaphor for life. Life is not a buffet. You don't get to say, I'll have that father and that mother and that kind of, I'll be born into this environment. You know, you're given a tray full of stuff, and some of it may appear unappetizing and some of it might be bitter, but you need all of it. This is your curriculum for this life. This is what's going to then get you to what you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do in this life, right? So I had to experience a hyper masculine, patriarchal, feudal subculture in India, coming from the warrior class, right? And growing up in that environment and seeing all of the abuse of the masculine and the denigration of the women, right? And the abuse of those women. So that 55 years later, I would write a book about the feminine. Right? If I didn't have that experience, I wouldn't do that. So I start to connect those dots, right? So you choose your life. Everything is there for your growth, for your evolution. And then express yourself in the world, right? Bring this into the world now. Not only rest comfortably in yourself, but and go on that hero's journey to scale those mountains and become who you're meant to be. That's like the caterpillar becoming a butterfly, right? You have to evolve, right? And live into your larger self and become that larger self. That's a painful journey. It's a challenging journey. It's Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey, right? That you have to, overcome all of these, slay those dragons, and confront your darkest, deepest fears so that you grow into your more potent being. And then become whole is the sixth step, which is all of us are born, we have genders and so forth, but we all have within us masculine and feminine energy. Carl Jung said every man has an inner woman, every woman has an inner man. It's not that we're supposed to be these polar opposite creatures. All of us have the capacity for strength and for love, right? But we sublimate, we suppress that loving side, right? We suppress the feminine, right? Because the world is all about, dominating and winning and conquering and achieving and so forth. So we're very imbalanced. Even the women are very often not in touch with their feminine side, because in a man's world, which is what we've created, in order to succeed, they have to be more masculine. Well, think about Margaret Thatcher, right? The Iron Lady, right? Golda Meir in Israel, also called the Iron Lady. In India, we had Indira Gandhi, who was our prime minister in the 70s. She was called the only woman in her cabinet, even though, I'm sorry, the only man in her cabinet,
Yes,
even though
indeed.
she was the only woman in her cabinet.
Yeah.
She was tougher than the toughest. But this wholeness is about integrating and masculine, feminine, both sides, being strong and loving. As Martin Luther King said, we must be tough-minded and tender-hearted. So how do we, as men and women, or whatever gender it is, we integrate all of those aspects within us? We have the loving side, right? And that's been suppressed in business as well and politics. And then the last one is to heal yourself, to recognize, first of all, acknowledge your wounds and traumas. All of us have them. Life is hard. Things happen to all of us that are traumatic. Just because they are commonplace doesn't make them less impactful. Things happen to all of us, right? And most of us never acknowledge our traumas and our wounds, and we bury them inside us, but then they end up affecting our behavior. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate.
Yes, and ultimately the businesses that these leaders run then just become an expression of this trauma. It plays out within their leadership style, and ultimately their teams are impacted, the organization's impacted, their customers are impacted, but they seek to blame lots of others as opposed to themselves. And I always say scaling is an inside-out job. You'll never scale beyond the framework of your own psyche in terms of the extent of the inner work that you've actually done.
Exactly. So the inner growth has to precede the external. The outer growth without inner growth is dangerous, because then you're going to become an instrument of suffering. You're going to spread that, the negative energy, the neuroses, the insecurities, the rage, the whatever else that you have unprocessed inside you. That'll become part of the culture. You look at Microsoft under Bill Gates. It was a certain way. Bill Gates was very aggressive, very arrogant. That became the whole culture. Steve Ballmer came in. He was aggressive and jumping around on stage, and he had all this. Everybody became like him, right? And then Satya Nadella comes along, and he's much more conscious and caring and evolving. Now it's changing the culture there. So yeah, that definitely becomes the culture once you are. So if you don't work on healing yourself, and most people are oblivious to their own wounds and traumas, or they're in denial, right? Or they don't want to look inside. One of the most painful things for many people is to look inside, because many people have had painful childhoods. They've had dysfunctional relationships with one or both parents, right? They've had in their formative years, they might have had some trauma. I've had experiences when I was growing up that were deeply traumatic. I had very traumatic incidents with my father. So I had a deep father wound, right? And all of that I buried and just kept going, until 5 years ago. I was writing that book, The Healing Organization, and 4 women told me the same thing. They said, Raj, you're writing a book about healing. What about your own healing? Okay. And I said, well, I have a book deadline in October. I don't have time for that. I said, no, you need to make time. That's important. I said, well, I think I'm okay. I don't think I need healing. I said, we know your story.
And practically, what did that journey look like, Raj? Did you engage with a coach, a therapist?
Oh, yes. All of the above. So I delayed my book by 5 months. Healing Organization was due in October. I pushed it to February. And then I took time off that entire summer. I said yes to a number of experiences. We went on my 60th birthday. We were up in the high Himalayas on the border between India and Tibet. I wrote that book, Shakti Leadership, and we do these Shakti spiritual journeys around the world. So that journey was to that region, which is the seat of the deepest Buddhist wisdom in the world. Think about Tibetan Buddhism, and that originally came from India. So that we went to all these monasteries and learned about suffering and so forth. I also said yes to a silent retreat, which I had previously said no to. So I spent 4 days in upstate New York in a place called Peace Village with about 35 other people, including Peter Senge and David Cooperrider and some of my heroes in the world of business. And in utter silence in those 4 days, something magical happens. You get connected to source. When you're not allowed to look at a phone or do anything. You're just kind of walking around in nature. And I had a notebook, And I had 45 pages of notes by the end of those 4 days. I literally had the outline for these 7 steps that I just told you. It's another book I need to write uh, in the future. So there's so much wisdom that comes, when we have that period of silence. I also did work for a coach for the first time that summer. And in my first meeting with her, I told the story of my life to her and where I came from and the kind of culture I came from and my relationship with my father. And then I told her the trajectory of my work, which was I was dissatisfied, unhappy in my work, unfulfilled, until I stumbled onto this work, Terms of Endearment, right? And literally writing that book and writing some of those stories, I had tears of joy in my body. I had never experienced tears of joy connected to my work before. I said, wow, this is opening up my heart for the first time ever connected to my work. My heart was completely disassociated from my work. And I had not been able to cry for 20 years before that. And suddenly I'm crying because I'm writing stories of what this company did for this family, or this employee or this community. And so that's how I discovered my purpose. So that was a turning point, and that Terms of Endearment came out, and then Conscious Capitalism happened, and then all these other books and so forth. And so my coach listened to all of this, and she said, do you realize that you spend 45 years of your life trying to impress your father? Because that's the world I come from, right? Father, patriarch, even though he cut me off for 5 years and I had this but even after that, I was still always trying to impress him and somehow feel that I'm worthy of him or he's going to be proud of me. And he never gave me that. And then she said, you spent 45 years trying to impress your father. And now you spent the last 15 years honoring your mother with you. That everything you're doing in Conscious Capitalism, Terms of Endearment, Shakti, all of this is bringing your mother's energy into the world of business and leadership, where it's completely lacking. There is no mother energy in business, is there? I mean, we don't see it. What is mother energy? It's compassion, it's empathy, it's love, it's inclusion, it's unconditional love, right? It's nurturing, it's forgiveness. It's all of those things are seen as weaknesses in the world of business, right? You have to be, put on your mask and armor and go and do battle out there in the marketplace. And so that became a major insight for me when she said that, because I am more like my mother, my nature, right? My innate qualities I share with my mother. And part of it was that she was a single parent for 7 years before my father came back into my life. But also I was just born like that, with that programming. So nature and nurture shaped me more like her. And I came to see that as a weakness. And ultimately I realized that is actually my secret power, right?
And do you see?
Yeah.
Do you see, Raj, in those organizations that you've referenced, the 28 and those that your work has concentrated on since, that the organization leadership is reflective of those masculine and feminine energies?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I observed that all the way back in 2011 after we started the Conscious Capitalism movement. I actually ran a conference here in Boston, which was the feminization of the culture. I said there's a rise of feminine values, feminine energy. We have existed for millennia, thousands of years. Every institution has been run by men on a limited set of masculine. So that's why our human history is one war after another. Right? If you look at Europe, European nations fought 1,200 wars in 600 years. With each other, 2 wars every year until 1946. Okay, and since 46, there have been 0 wars on European soil, except now this Ukraine thing. Right, so there's an evolution. There was a book that said America is from Mars and Europe is from Venus. That classic.
I know it well. My daughter actually took me to see the Barbie movie last night. My eldest daughter. So I never thought I would go in to watch a movie on a Monday night with my daughter, a Barbie movie, and I encourage all men out there to go and watch this movie. It's
I've been reading reviews about it. Yeah. So I think that is critical. So we saw that in all these companies. Even most of them were run by men, but they very much were integrated.
Yeah.
Right? They had that loving, caring side deeply embedded in them. And often it came from their wives, but often they were just like that. So that's very much true. Every conscious company has to have both of these. In fact, we go beyond that, then the wholeness is There's masculine, feminine, but there's also the elder and the child energy. The elder energy is meaning, purpose, legacy, impact, transcendence, something higher, spiritual dimension. And the child energy is joy, playfulness, laughter, humor, creativity, right? And that is also critical. See, you cannot have innovation without child energy, healthy child energy, right? Because otherwise you're stuck in your paradigm, in your box, and you just think the normal way. And so having all four energies present within each of us and in our organizational cultures is important. And the summary phrase that we use is the wise fool of tough love. Can you as a leader become the wise fool of tough love? What does that mean? You've got the wisdom of the elder, of your own higher self. You have the foolishness of the child. You don't take yourself so seriously, and you've got the capacity for joy and play, right? And that doesn't happen if you have a wounded inner child. Most of us are carrying around a wounded inner child, which is why we lose our capacity for play and laughter, right? We become very grim as we get older. And then the tough and the love, right? The strong father and the loving mother. Energy, again, it's all energy, right? So can we embody that and then use the right energy for the right situation, right? That shows up. So again, going back to your question of how I worked on myself, the coaching was the third part. And that realization that I had been, in a way, bringing my mother's energy into the world and honoring my mother with my work. And she said, does your mother know that? And I said, well, I didn't know that until 2 minutes ago. How would my mother know that? And she said, well, you need to call her and tell her that. And I said, oh, come on, we don't talk like that in my family. We don't talk about such things. We talk about the weather and we talk about how your knee's feeling today and, safe subjects, right? She said, no, it's important. You need to have this conversation. I said, well, every time I call, my father picks up the phone and he puts it on speaker. And if I say these things, he's going to say, what's wrong with him? Why is he talking like this? No. She said, no, it's important. I don't care. You have to. I said, I'm going to India in 3 weeks. I'll tell her in person. She said, your mother is 81 years old. You don't know what happens in 3 weeks. You need to call her and tell her this is important. So the next morning I called her, and fortunately my father was in the shower, and I told her, Mommy, everything I've done in the world that has made a difference and that has mattered is because of you. What you showed us, how you loved us, how you took care of us. In 61 years, 62 years, she never once raised her voice to me. Not once.
It's wonderful, Raj, that you had the opportunity to tell her that.
It was such a gift. I have it on my phone. I recorded it.
Oh, wow.
That's her, by the way. You can see her.
Yeah, beautiful. I caught it glimpse. Yeah. Beautiful.
It was such a gift because she just started crying when I said that. And she said, Raj, I am nothing. I'm nothing. I said, no, you're everything. I don't know if I'd be alive. It's you can survive one difficult parent if you have one loving parent, but otherwise life gets very, very hard. And, she thought of herself as insignificant. She's only educated till the 8th grade. My father got a PhD and is a gold medal winning scientist. And so she thought she's just here cooking and cleaning and taking care of people. And, she didn't matter. Her life didn't matter. And now I think she had the realization, it was very healing for her to know that actually she had made a difference, And so that became such a gift. And one of the things that came to me, and this is another part of my growth that year, a friend of mine was telling me about these plant medicines, plant journeys. Right? And I had no idea what she was talking about. I thought she meant that you eat some very healthy organic vegetables.
Ayahuasca.
Come with me. Yeah, well, that came later. But come with me to this place in New York, and this woman hosts these plant journeys. I went, and I had this incredibly beautiful experience on some other planet, and it really opened up my psyche and gave me access to insight and consciousness, and really showed me a movie of my young, childhood, and connected the dots for me, saying you experienced this, and therefore you did this, and it all started to make sense for me. And one of the things that came to me in one of those planned journeys was that love that is not expressed is like a check that is never cashed. It doesn't do any good for anybody, right? Now, if I had all this love in my heart, and if I didn't have that conversation with my mother, because we don't talk like that, she would die. She did die a year later. She would die thinking her life was meaningless. And that's a really, that's a lot of despair at the end of life, right? And so it was such a gift. And I tell everybody, please, reach out today, express your love, right? If your love is in here, let people know, because we just think people know. They don't know. And they need it. They need to hear that. And it's going to be the most healing thing for you and for them, to do that.
Well, you have got to that before I did, because I was going to appeal to everyone listening, if they want to start on the inner work to develop themselves as a conscious leader and ultimately to create a conscious organization, to start with that simple act of gratitude for those closest to them today, because you don't know when you will get the next opportunity. My mother has dementia now, so the conversations with my mother are very, very, very different. And yeah, it thankfully, like you, for the last number of years, before it progressed rapidly, I had the opportunity to record, ask her questions about her early memories, about her childhood, and she regaled in some wonderfully delightful detail the wonderful childhood memories that she has, and I've captured and recorded those, thankfully. So
I didn't get a chance to do that. I had that conversation, but then then my father died suddenly, and then my mother was still with us, and I made a plan to go to India and just spend a few weeks just sitting with her and talking to her. But then
beautiful.
suddenly she had a gallbladder operation. She went to the hospital and died. So I never got that chance to really be with her, and because under the shadow of my father was such a domineering presence in her life that she never got to blossom. She never got to be who she was. She remained, kind of suppressed in that way. So, and the last thing that happened that year was I went to the Amazon rainforest. This is all part of my year of conscious awakening, right? The year I turned 60. And 60 is a big deal, right? 60 is kind of the 2/3, milestone, right? It's like if you look at most plays, they're in 3 acts. Life is in 3 acts. This is the beginning of the 3rd act and the final act. And so it's a time to take stock, look back, and look ahead. How do I make sense of it all? What does that mean for myself and for others? And how do I live from this point forward? And so the last piece of that was going to the Amazon rainforest with a group called the Pachamama Alliance.
I'm aware of them, actually. One of my Wim Hof method, one of my Wim Hof method instructor friends actually lives in that community.
See, there's a guy in Ireland. He teaches there at the university. He was on the trip with me. I forget his name now. Wonderful guy. He's a professor there in Ireland. So we were 10 days in the Amazon rainforest with these indigenous people, the Achuar and the Zapara, deep inside the rainforest. And literally, we had to fly into Quito, take a 3-hour bus ride to the edge of the rainforest, and then take these tiny little airplanes for hours flying over the forest and landing on a dirt strip somewhere, and then next to a small river, and then the shamans and all receive us. We go down the river in a canoe, and then we stay in those communities. And every morning we have shamanic healing and dream interpretation and hiking in the rainforest and swimming with the pink dolphins in the rivers and all kinds of, tobacco ceremonies. But one of them was the ayahuasca, as you mentioned. Ayahuasca, for your listeners, people are becoming more aware of this now. But this is a brew that has been around for maybe 10,000 years in the rainforest, where at some point the shamans discovered that if you take the roots of one plant and the leaves of another plant and you boil them together for 2 or 3 days, it results in this brew that has this tremendous consciousness altering effect. And they call it the grandmother plant that connects you to Mother Earth and Mother Energy. Right? And I went there to learn about healing. And so I said, please teach me. And it was an incredible experience. And I write about it in my new book, Awaken. I had a series of visions all night long about healing. And I'll just share 2 of them. One of them, I was shown a line of people standing under the hot sun, like thousands of people. And they're waiting in line. And at the end of the line is a tiny little woman. They're walking up to her and getting a deep hug from her, right? And then walking away in tears, having experienced unconditional love, perhaps, for the first time in their life. And so I was being shown this, and I recognized her as Amma. She's known as the hugging saint from India. She travels all over the world. She comes to Boston every August, and people literally stand in line for 12 hours to get a hug from Amma. And she doesn't even say anything. There's something about her, right? The message I got was that all of these people standing in line, they could be hugging each other.
Yeah, of course.
You don't need to wait for Amma. That they have within each other the power to heal. that we humans are the cause of suffering for each other, but we humans are also the source of deep healing for each other. And the person next to you could be a stranger. And I've done this in conferences, by the way. I go through a hugging thing, and by the end of it, they're both in tears. They're both, they go through this hugging, and I have a series of things that I say as they are holding each other. The person you're holding is somebody's daughter, somebody's son, somebody's husband. This person has suffered rejection in their life. This person has experienced feeling, inadequate at some times. This person has experienced, etc. By the end of it, they're melted into each other and crying together. And so that was one vision. And the last vision was, I got these 4 words floating. And actually, it was an acronym. I make acronyms out of everything. If you read my books. And this came as the list. In the voice, there's always a narrating voice behind it all. And the voice said, this is what the world needs in order to heal. This is what business needs in order to heal. And this is what each of us need in order to heal. And it came as the list, L-I-S-T. And then each word came into prominence, starting with love. That everything we do in life must come from love. Every single action and every single word you utter should come from love. Not greed, not fear, not anger, not jealousy, not any other emotion. It should come from love. Even the hardest decision, if you have to let somebody go, fire them remove them from a job, or if you have to, pull the plug on somebody who's dying, do it with love. That's our essential nature. That there are many ways we can be hurtful. There's only one way to heal, and that is through love. And everything should be done from love. And I've really been challenged to think about it that way. Can this conversation come from love? Can everything I do today, tomorrow, with my children, with my, at my job, can it be rooted in love, which is an unconditional desire for the well-being of the other, without any agenda and without seeking anything? But this is expression. Love is who we are. We're meant to express it into the world. Right? It's not from any, quid pro quo. If I do this, Brendan will do this. Just love. Be love and express love. Second is innocence. Well, that's interesting. We are all born innocent. And then, we get corrupted by the ways of the world, right? We get corrupted by the society, by the system. We're kind of taught how to use our intelligence to climb over each other, win in this game where life is like a battle and who wins and everybody else loses. We learn to lie and cheat in order to get what we want, very often. In some cases, people have the value system given to them, but most cases we get corrupted in a way. And we don't have a choice. As a child, you're born innocent and then you get corrupted. None of that is a choice. That happens to you. But then when you become an adult, you choose. And can you choose to return to innocence? Living with innocence, again, means not knowingly causing harm, suffering to another. Unnecessary suffering. Some suffering is unavoidable, right? Can we choose innocence? As it says in the Tai Ching, at the very core center of us, there dwells an innocent being. That is our true self. And if we live into that, that's who we are meant to be. We're not meant to be this corroded creature that we become, right? Go back to that purity of it. My mother was as innocent at 82 when she died as she was when she was 5 years old. Somehow she managed to preserve that. It's incredible. She's a rare soul in that way. But that innocence, I think, is a big thing, right? We lose it. And that's one of the things, by the way, I went to a series of Catholic schools, growing up in India and then Barbados and so forth. And one of the things that really stuck with me was that sense that you are born a sinner, right? That really always depressed me. I said, well, I didn't do anything. Somehow we are born a sinner and you have to figure out a way to redeem yourself, as opposed to saying you're pure, right? And figure out a way to get back to that.
I love
to
that.
me, that's the empowering message. And the third is simplicity. We make life too complicated. The most important things in life are simple, right? And if we stay focused on those essential things, right? Love and compassion and caring and collect, all of those elements. As Oliver Wendell Holmes said, I would not give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity. I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. How do we get to that, the essence of things, right? When it becomes simple again, right? We are mired, we are rooted in the complexity. We get lost in that complexity. How do we get to that simplicity? And that takes work. That takes some kind of mastery, inner mastery, to get to simplicity. Right?
Yeah, our own mantra is simple scales, complex feels.
Yeah. But getting to simplicity, the right kind. See, there's simplicity. I mean, there's simplistic, and then there's the true simplicity.
Yeah.
Simplistic is having a kind of a low-level consciousness, like saying business is all about money. Profit equals revenue minus cost. So therefore, to maximize profit, maximize revenue, minimize cost, which means charge as much as possible, sell people stuff even if they don't need it, and minimize cost, pay people as little as possible, pay your suppliers as little as possible. That's simplistic. That's not worth anything. That's not a business. That's a parasite. You're sucking value. You're not creating value, right? But the simplicity on the other side, treat everybody with love and respect and dignity, give them meaning and purpose, right? And then all these amazing things will happen. People will be innovative and creative and caring and efficient and all of these kinds of things. So simplicity, but again, it's not, it's very, what's the saying from Tagore, that it is simple to be happy, but it's very hard to be simple.
So true.
And then the last is the truth. What's our commitment to the truth? We live in a time when we talk about alternative facts, and truth seems to have lost all meaning. It's all spin and marketing. I got a PhD in marketing. I don't think we use the word truth. It's about what do we need to say in order to get people excited about this thing, right? What is the truth? The truth is fundamental. Gandhi's autobiography was called My Experiments with Truth. And truth is more fundamental even than peace, because without truth there can be no peace. Think about South Africa. And at the end of apartheid, if they had just said, okay, that's over, now let's move on. Well, there was all kinds of pent-up suffering and rage, right, that needed to be acknowledged. There was things that people did to each other that needed to be acknowledged. So they had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was essential, because without truth, there is no reconciliation. If you don't acknowledge, what was done to the Africans those 200 years under apartheid, right, then we cannot move forward in the same country together. There would have been a civil war. There would have been revenge-fueled violence for decades, unending. But because they had the wisdom, Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, to do that, to basically beg forgiveness, to grant forgiveness, and then to atone and acknowledge and then atone for what had happened, then you can move forward, right, together. I think that's something we have to do. The US hasn't done a very good job of that. The US has never fully acknowledged its past.
Yeah.
It's just always about moving forward, right? So that was the great gift that came through me, I believe, in that ayahuasca experience. I strive, for me now, it's two things: continuing to heal myself, working on my healing, right? Trying to live by the list: love, innocence, simplicity, and truth. And then the last piece of it, really, I was given the gift of these parents who were polar opposites of each other. My father had masculine energy, but no feminine energy. He had great personal power and charisma and brilliance and drive and determination, but his love was entirely conditional. Like when I said I want to marry somebody he didn't approve, he cut me off for 5 years. He said, I curse your marriage and you're dead to me. Okay. My mother had pure unconditional love. There's nothing I could do that would diminish that, but she did not have any power. She had no personal power. She never cultivated her personal power, her sense of being, herself, which is why she could never prevent some of the pain that my father inflicted on so many, right? Because she could not stand for love. So you have to empower that love, right? To me, can you manifest personal power and unconditional love together? That to me is the holy grail. Do it as a leader. Create a culture where it's, you've got strength and love coming together, tough-minded and tender-hearted, simultaneously.
And what I would suggest is that actually her power is manifested through you now. You're yes. delivering selfless work to the world. You've authored now 15 books. You've founded some amazing organizations. So whilst it might not have been witnessed through your mother, it's certainly manifesting through everything that you're doing. And I want to thank you, Raj, for sharing what is something is very deeply personal to you, and undoubtedly many of our listeners will resonate with what you have spoken to today. We have a tradition on the show, conscious of the time. You have offered so much wisdom today, but I always challenge our guests to leave our listeners with 3 timeless takeaways.
3 timeless takeaways. Well, I would say there would be some version of what I just said to you. Work on healing yourself. We all need healing. Look at what needs healing within you. Strive to live by the list. Love, innocence, simplicity, and truth at work and in your personal life. And evolve into this being that simultaneously manifests unconditional love and great personal power. Not positional power. Positional power can get taken away, but personal power is within you. Comes from within, right? So cultivate. I think to me, that's the journey. Business and work are one expression of our impact in the world. It's the most potent expression for many of us, the scalable one. And so I think business leaders especially have a great opportunity to live the most meaningful and fulfilling lives human beings have ever led, if they do business in this way and if they work on themselves in this way.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear, Raj. I have thoroughly enjoyed the last 90 minutes. The time has flown. I want to thank you for your profound wisdom today, your energy, and your absolute openness. It's been a wonderful conversation. I wish you every success with your continued journey, and continue to bring your wonderful work to the world. I appeal to our leaders. I first came to your work through the wonderful book, The Healing Organization. I would appeal to our listeners to certainly pick that up. I'm going to put you on the spot. If you were to encourage or recommend to our listeners one of your books, which one would it be? And often when I put our guests in the spot like this, they say, "Oh, don't. That's like asking me to pick between my children."
Well, so I would say, the book Awaken, which came out in April, is kind of the culmination of my journey so far, right? And it is a personal journey, a story, but that which, as Carl Rogers said, that which is deeply personal is also completely universal. So I have shared my evolution as a human, as a business thinker, how conscious capitalism came about, how that evolved, how I've evolved along the way, and what I've learned. So I would say that is, I think, and people who are reading it are finding it kind of a life-changing book. It has a lot of reflections at the end of every chapter, and you can think about all of these things in the context of your own life. There are book clubs that are doing that now. They're reading the book and then they're working on those exercises. So I would say that is, in terms of personal transformation and impact, that might be the most powerful. The Healing Organization is probably the most heart-based book I've done. I must have cried 3 or 4 times writing that book, because those stories are very moving to me. So that also is powerful. But yeah, as you said, I think they all exist for a reason, all these books.
Well done you, Raj. If people want to connect with you, which I'm sure they absolutely will, and learn a little bit more about your work, where best to reach you?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. And I also have my website, rajsisodia.com. There's a way to connect with that as well.
Great. Well, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Raj, thank you once again. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Take care.
Thank you, Brandon.